In his essay, Guidelines for Teaching the Holocaust, Avoiding Common Pedagogical Errors, David Lindquist will list 8 different problematic areas faced by teachers today that are teaching Holocaust studies. The one I want to focus on in particular is contextualizing the Holocaust in his historical larger framework, namely the Second World War. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to serve up little pieces of what David Lindquist would say is the what happened, the Holocaust, and the how it happened, the war. Now, I'm going to do this by providing a case study. And this case study actually has 2 different purposes. Number one, it will actually verify Lindquist's claim, which is we should be viewing and teaching the Holocaust in its larger historical context. Now, the second feature about the case study is this. It will show us how collective memory is influenced, and maybe even we should challenge it. It will also reveal to us a perspective many of you may not have considered in viewing the Holocaust. And it will also show us how it can promote historical thinking. Let me get into the case study. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte said that mobility is the keynote of war. And it's mobility that was behind the whole idea of the Autobahn. Okay, it wasn't so much a German employment as it was concerned about military deployment, okay, or troop deployment. It was designed to move 300,000 troops from the eastern border of the Reich to the western border in 2 nights of hard travel. Right? Now, Napoleon, well, he also said that an army marches on its stomach. Well, just as an army will march on its stomach, so too did the German army during World War II require fuel, petrol in this case, and tires, rubber, to keep its army rolling. And both of those resources were not renewable, nor were they sustainable to the Reich economy. And this created a problem. It led to the downfall of Germany, and it also contributed to the death of thousands of slave laborers. And Germany knew that they had a problem with these resources. One of the great documents to come out of the Third Reich was the 4-year plan, 1936-1939. This was Hitler's outline to create a Germany that was independent of having to import any of its natural resources. And in our particular case, it would be synthetic. It would be fuel and it would be rubber. So he pushed in this agenda the need for synthetic rubber and synthetic fuel. Now, this also contained a warning in the 4-year plan to the producers of synthetic rubber. He said, it is up to these producers to rack their brains to find newer methods to produce more synthetic rubber and to produce it faster, lest the German government rack their own brains in finding these methods. And if they did, what need would there be for private industry? Well, that brings us to IG Farben, the great big conglomerate who at that time was the largest company in Europe and the 4th largest company in the world, right behind General Motors, Standard United States Steel, and Standard Oil of New Jersey. Well, IG Farben, they were the world leader in producing synthetic rubber, also known as Buna. By 1940, they had already owned and operated 3 different plants, and they had their sights on a 4th. And they ended up settling on a location in this town called Monowitz, which was not too far from another town that the Germans called Auschwitz. Now, what made Monowitz so appealing was that IG Farben would soon have access to a huge pool of slave laborers. And what ended up happening is the IG became the very first private firm not only to fully fund and operate a slave labor camp, they were the first private firm to sign a contract for slave labor with the SS. Now, This plant that they built was going to require a lot of labor. It was huge. It dwarfed Auschwitz II, Birkenau. It was a complete state-of-the-art facility, and it was so big that it required more electricity to run than the entire city of Berlin during that time. Well, the IG was going to provide food, and the SS were to provide the labor. Now, the food that they provided, and healthcare, by the way, was no better than any other camp. But let's take a look at the camp for a little bit. It had many of the same attributes that you're going to find in a lot of the other camps. It had the electrical wires, it had barbed wire, it had armed guards, trained police dogs, warning sirens, floodlights. It had a standing cell. It had gallows. They performed medical experiments at the camp, and they also performed selections at what we now call Bunemanovitz. It also had above its entrance the cynical Arbeit macht frei, work makes one free. Conditions at the camp: if you were assigned to Bunemanovitz, it was absolutely one of the worst labor assignments anyone could receive. It was particularly notorious for the unloading of and hauling 100-pound sacks of cement, these large metal pipes, all at a constant pace, at a constant runner's pace, and all under the blows of the capos and of the guards there. The food, poor nutrition, labor, intense, backbreaking. Prisoners at Bunemanovitz lost anywhere from 4 to 9 pounds a week. In addition to that, the average life expectancy was anywhere from 3 to 4 months. Now, Rudolf Verber said that at Bunemanovitz there were actually two types of laborers, the quick and the dead. Well, we don't know exactly how many total people died as a result of being at Monowitz, but there are some numbers that I will share with you today, and these are the less controversial numbers. Okay, we do know that on a low end, it's accepted that no fewer than 10,000 people died because of their time at Bunemanovitz. And that number can go anywhere up to maybe 22,000 or 25,000. We also know that from January 1st, January 19th, 1942 to August 19th, 1942, 86% of all the recorded deaths were Jews. After 1943, we know that almost 100% of all the inmates selected for selection were Jews. We also know that as far as early spring of 1944, 80 to 90% of all the inmates were Jews. And by the time 1945 comes, right before the evacuation, anywhere from 92, just about 92 to 95% of the inmates at the camp were Jews. Now, this is really rather fascinating because in 1966, they erected on the facility of the factory, which, by the way, it remained a factory, and it was under Polish control now, Polish state control in 1966. They erected a monument, 4 posts that were reminiscent of the posts in the fences that would be around the camp, barbed wire, but it also had these plaques. And let me read to you what the inscription is for this plaque, which is really rather fascinating. Here in the years 1941 to 1945, upon the site of the former extermination camp, Auschwitz-Bunemanovitz, the Nazi perpetrators of the genocide killed about 30,000 political and war prisoners of various nationalities. We honor their memory, the community of the Auschwitz district. Now, think about this for a second. Political and war prisoners, various nationalities. We know that a high percentage of the people there were Jews. Jews were not prisoners of war, and they were not political prisoners. What this plaque states is the narrative of what was happening during the time, and it was summed up very well by Dr. Michael Steinway. He writes, in consigning the memory of the Jews to that of other nations martyred by the Nazis, official Polish attempts to deal with the memory of the Holocaust doubtless reflected, after all, a popular need. And at that time in 1966, what was needed was a suppression of the memory of the Holocaust and a suppression of the memory of the Jews suffering during that time. Okay? So you can see where to think about and to honor or to commemorate the Polish suffering would not have done much for the national memory of the Polish people. Now, that's one of the things that come out of the study. The second thing is I talked about as perspectives. What this now does, this brief study, is it offers a little different perspective in which to view the Holocaust through the eyes of industrialists. A third thing that the case study reveals is I mentioned that it promotes critical thinking. So I want to go back to I.G. Farben for a second. In his book, Divide and Prosper, the heirs of I.G. Farben under the Allied authorities, Raymond Stokes, he says this about the relationship between I.G. Farben, the Nazis, and synthetics. I.G. Farben and the Nazis shared aims in the production of Eretz materials, in particular synthetic oil, rubber, and nitric acid. In the long term, the war the Germans embarked upon in 1939 would not have been possible were it not for the production of synthetics. Recall there was a comment in Lindquist's essay where he says, there's a very popular phrase. It says, no war, no Holocaust. Well, we could boil Stokes' comment down by possibly saying this: no synthetics, no war.